Hey everyone, it's Monica. Welcome back to Homeschool Voices. Today I'm going to talk about one of the biggest problems with the American public school system and what you can do differently at home. I'm going to describe the American school system in about 30 seconds. You have a teacher, she's an authority figure. She gives the kids a bunch of books. Every week they go through a chapter, they memorize stuff, they're tested, they repeat for 13 years. That's basically the American school system in a nutshell. Most children accept that teacher as an authority figure. That authority figure is considered trustworthy by most of the children. Even if they don't like the teacher, they still consider them trustworthy. Most kids do. That is the setup. It is on purpose. That is a problem because you grow up after 13 years of this sort of conditioning, to believe, hey, when an authority figure tells me something is true, I have to believe it. 95% of what they do in the American school system is memorizing bits of facts. Now, that word fact to me is a little troublesome because they're never ever taught to evaluate whether or not what they're being told to memorize is fact. They are being told that this teacher, this authority figure, is trustworthy, and therefore, because they are trustworthy, what that teacher is giving you is indeed a fact, and you must memorize it. Because that's what they do their entire childhood, and then they, unsurprisingly, grow up to be adults who do the same thing. And that is what most people consider an education in the United States. What I am going to suggest to you is that that is not a true education, though it is what is done in public schools. Public schools are teaching your child to accept another human being as an authority figure who is trustworthy. Therefore, we can accept any information that comes from that person as fact, and we should memorize those facts, right? And so after 13 years of this, it is very understandable that a person not only mentally justifies that whole setup, that whole scenario as good and necessary, but they continue that behavior into adulthood. So the result of that sort of education is an adult who grows up and the most thinking that they ever do is to evaluate whether a person is a trustworthy authority figure. Once they have determined that somebody is trustworthy and that they are an authority figure, then they will believe almost anything that that person says. It will take a lot of evidence against that person to make this adult, this product of the American public school system, to not trust that authority figure. But once they have decided to trust an authority figure, they will believe most of what that person says. I hope you can see why this is concerning. You're going to see it from Democrats. You're going to see Republicans doing this. If you start to pay attention, you will see that this really is true. This is how most people function because they were never taught to evaluate the information that is coming to them. Have you ever heard anybody ask, "Are you an expert?" I hear it all the time. What does that mean? Are you an authority on this topic? Are you a trustworthy authority on this topic? The implication is because you are not considered an authority figure, nothing out of your mouth could be factually true. Nothing out of your mouth could be intelligent. You see, people say, "Are you an expert?" because they have never been taught to think, to evaluate information. That is the job of their teachers, of once they grow up, of the experts. Their job is not to think, not to evaluate information. Their job is to memorize what others tell them. That is the fundamental flaw in the American school system. It's the whole way that it is set up. This idea that we memorize information, we memorize facts, and then we repeat them, and then now we're educated. What I want to suggest to you is another way. I want to suggest that you can teach your child to think. So some people might say that the goal of an education is to learn a bunch of things. I would say that the goal of an education is to learn how to think clearly. Now, of course, through that process of learning how to think clearly, you will learn all kinds of facts. You will gain proficiency in skills, but the main overarching goal is to learn to think clearly. You may be wondering, Well, how do I do that? A lot of you are probably homeschooling because of COVID-19. You have a few months with your kid. I'm going to suggest that even if your kid is in public school, you can still take some of these tips that I'm going to give you and implement them in your child's education, because ultimately, whether your kid is in public school or they're homeschooled, the parent is the one ultimately responsible for that child's education. So you're still responsible. And I still have some really good tips for you. So the most important thing, if you are homeschooling and you are picking a curriculum, is not to copy the public school system at home. Now, that doesn't mean, in my opinion, that does not mean not educating your kid. No, I think that I value education, and I think our kids should be highly educated, but I do not consider memorization of facts to be equivalent with an education. I think teaching a person to think is what it means to educate them. How do you do that? How do you teach someone to think? Well, the first crucial step is to teach them to read, and to read a lot, and to read quickly, and to retain information. And how do you do that? You just do it by reading. You just read, okay? Well, my kid doesn't like to read, or I don't like to read. Well, you need to work on it. You need to work on it. Now, it might be hard. It's hard for me. I value reading because I know what it can do to a person, the wonderful things that it can do to a person. Reading, you increase your vocabulary, you're exposed to all kinds of ideas. So if you don't like to read, if your kid doesn't like to read, the biggest thing is you have to lower the amount of screen time that your kids consume. Less videos, less movies, less time on their phone, less. Really, they should not be spending that much time on a phone or in front of a screen in a day. It should be a small amount of time, especially if they're pushing back. It's because they have been conditioned by all these fast rewards. When you're on a phone, or you're watching YouTube videos, or you're watching a movie, it's fast rewards. For example, when you watch a movie, you'll notice usually 3 seconds doesn't go by without a change of scenes, with a cut, I should say. I mean, I even do it in my videos because it's interesting, it's entertaining, but it trains our brain to expect reward. It's like a reward. Whenever you have a cut, it's a reward. In video games, I mean, it's constant rewards, right? So your child may not want to read because they're just not accustomed to sitting down and not getting constant stimulation and sort of rewards. So you're just going to need to work on that. You need to cut down on the screen time and just think of it like exercise, right? When you exercise, it's supposed to be a little challenging, and each time you get better. It's the same with reading. Each time you're going to get a little better, and it's going to get a little easier. And just be positive about it and do it regular, do it daily. But reading is not enough. You cannot just give your kid a bunch of books and expect that they are guaranteed to be intelligent people. The biggest thing, though, is you're exposed, aside from vocabulary, is you're exposed to ideas. Now, a person who really is intelligent and is really well educated has engaged with ideas. So now we have to engage with ideas. There's a couple of ways to do that. One is writing, and the other would be more an oral engagement. So you can ask your kids questions. So if your kid read a book, you don't have time to read the book. You can find Cliff Notes online or chapter summaries for most books. And you can use those chapter summaries to ask your kids questions. And I've done this before, but you just have to work on it, keep pushing it. I mean, my daughter is this girl who cried at book time at night because she didn't want to read, or she didn't want to read what we were reading. She complained and cried when I taught her how to read. Why? Because it was never what she wanted to do, basically because I suggested it. My point is, I kept on, I was persistent, and now she loves to read, and she's a great reader. So, but what you have to do is to start engaging them, right? When they read, you have to ask them questions, and it doesn't have to be really formal, but you just ask them, hey, what was that about? What did you think about that? And then sometimes they'll give you answers, and sometimes things are messed up that the characters do, and you say, hey, did you agree with that? And they'll say, no, I don't like that. And you say, why? And you know what they'll normally say when you haven't really done this sort of thing? They'll say, I don't know. Well, that's a terrible answer. That is what we want to leave in childhood. You don't want your child to be an adult and say, I don't know. Or well, because everyone else says so, or because the experts say so. I mean, you want them to have a reason. You want them to think, right? So push them. Okay, well, think about it. Or if they're really having a hard time coming up with a reason, give them a few possibilities, right, that are logical, and they'll pick one. And keep doing this. Eventually, they'll start to be able to back up their opinion. So they'll have an opinion, not only have an opinion, but they'll be able to back it up. Or one thing that I like to do is when a character does something that you don't really agree with, or that your child doesn't agree with, you say, why do you think they did that? So one thing that you guys can look up is a Socratic discussion. And I think my next video is going to be a Socratic discussion with my kids, as long as they are cooperative. But you basically is asking questions, and you want to ask a lot of questions, but you really want to guide your kids to start to really have a reason for what they say. Any opinion that they have, any claim that they make, require them to have a reason for it. They shouldn't just have opinions and just say things without being able to back it up with something. That gets me into writing. If your kid can't write, then they're not thinking clearly. It doesn't mean they're stupid. It means they have not been trained to think clearly. When you can have an idea in your head and it's clearly articulated in your head, then you can put that on paper. And the reason why people don't have an easy time writing is because their thoughts are not really clear. It's as simple as that. So learning to write isn't so much about writing, it's about training a person to think clearly. Now, see, back to public schools, they're really not teaching kids to write well. I mean, think about it. Do you think that most kids who graduated from American public schools are good writers? Clear writers, effective writers, persuasive writers? I think the obvious answer is no. And why? I don't know that the end goal of a public school education is to have a population of people that are clear thinkers. If they wanted you to think, instead of having a setup where we just memorize information, we would have a setup where kids read things and there's amazing discussions in the classes and kids have to back up their opinions on things. That would be that's very different from what we have in schools. If we wanted our population to be thinkers, we wouldn't have the public school system that we have. The public school system that we have is designed to produce adults who, once you can get them to accept you as an authority figure, they will just believe what you tell them, right? Just like they did in school. That is the design of it. So you don't want to copy that in your school. You want your kid to read a lot, be exposed to a lot of ideas, and you want to have them engage with that material through discussion and also through writing. You really want both. Again, because they're not thinking clearly if they can't write. So you either gonna struggle through it and figure out a way to teach them, or you're gonna find someone else who can teach them to write. But it is crucial that they learn to write. But I just want to mention a couple of more things before I'm all done. Another way that you can teach your child to think clearly is by teaching them informal and formal logic. Informal logic, so far, as far as my understanding, because I wasn't taught it, but I am aware of it. So we have been learning about logical fallacies, for example, which are used constantly. And then there's a lot more to it. So we're going to do next year formal logic. And then there's also rhetoric. So yes, you can use rhetoric. Rhetoric is the art of basically getting people to agree with you and do what you want. So it's nice to use, I suppose, but it's even better to be able to spot and to recognize it when people are trying to use it on you. This is something I think is sorely lacking in our culture. People seem very incapable of recognizing rhetoric. Lastly, I really believe strongly that we all need a solid understanding of math. The reason being is that it's very easy to manipulate and to confuse people with numbers, because as a culture, we are very uneducated with math. So you can say almost anything, even when the raw data is out there for anyone to grab, for anyone to manipulate and truly understand what's going on. But you can say anything that you want to, and maybe throw in a personal story here and there and freak people out and make them do whatever you want to and make them agree with anything that you want to make them agree with. So math is really important. Now, I think with something like math, we need to go a little further than what we will need in daily life, because we need to get that part of our brain really, really well worked. For example, we need to at least know enough math to figure out a percentage, so we can figure out rates of things, so we know what our chances are of something happening to us, for example. These numbers are out there for all of us to look at ourselves, but most Americans don't know how to look at that information. So they just trust the experts, just like they did for 13 years of their childhood, to tell them what the facts are, and then they just memorize the facts, right? Because they don't know how to look at information themselves and make sense out of it. I hope that helps. So basically, we don't want to set up a system in our homes where there's an expert telling you facts to memorize. We want to set up a system where our kids do a lot of reading, and then we have discussions about it, and we teach our kids to back up their opinions with things that they have read, and that builds and builds. And that's how you raise an educated adult. That's how you do it, guys. So let me know what you think. Do you agree with me that this is the fundamental problem of the American school system? What do you think? If not, what do you think it is? And do you think that I missed something? Is there something else that people need to do differently at home? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please click thumbs up. If you want to hear more videos like this, please click the subscribe button and the notification bell next to it. In the meantime, happy homeschooling and have a great day.